allow me to invite or welcome Azure McFarlane, Microsoft MVP Business Applications from the US, all the way from the US. Azure, are you there?
Looks like I'm on mute. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. It's afternoon. How are you doing?
We are doing well. We are doing well. I am sure you haven't slept yet.
I took a nap. I took a little bit of a nap, so I'm good to go. But after this, I will go back to sleep.
Okay. Well and good. Well, take it over.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. We're not going to spend too much in the PowerPoint. Give me 1 second to get myself together. All right, so good afternoon. My name is Azure McFarlane, and I'm here to do a little bit of integration about things that you can do in Power Platform. So you've learned about what today? Power Pages, you learned about Canvas apps, you've learned about Power Automate. And you're probably wondering, well, how do all of these fit together? So this is what we're going to talk to a little bit about today. We're going to do an integration with Power Apps and Power Automate to give you a little bit more of an idea of what you can do with the platform. So a little bit about me. I'm a Power Platform consultant. I live in the Washington, D.C. area, which is on the furthest East Coast, as Francis said. I am a BizApps MVP, and you can connect with me online on Twitter if you're there, LinkedIn, and there's also my link tree here that'll give you all the links to information about me. My background, I originally started in biochemistry, so I have no tech background whatsoever. Went to school for science and worked in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry for about the last 10 years or so. Last year, in 2019, I discovered Power Automate, really fell in love with it and how much you could do with the platform, started automating a bunch of things around my company, ended up teaching, like our internal boot camp, then started getting external invitations, and ended up landing a job at the same company last year, earlier in the spring, working specifically with Power Platform. We didn't have anybody at my work site that knew it, but I had gotten so proficient at it, it ended up being a new career path for me. And then earlier this year, I transitioned into more formal consulting. So I left pharmaceuticals and went into general consulting. And right now I'm in between opportunities. So I'll be looking I'm on the hunt for a new job. So hopefully by the new year, I will have a new job. But this is my, PSA, my public servant announcement to say, if you are not in tech, if you don't have a tech background, it doesn't matter. Power Platform is absolutely for you. And I'm pretty sure you've seen that today, like Rachel Irabor, she is a student, right? So Power Platform is for anyone of any age. And hopefully this gives you some ideas of things like to take back to your business, things that maybe you can automate at home, get familiar with the rest of the platform because it's a ton of fun. There's a lot to learn, so don't feel the need that you need to know everything. Okay, so you've probably seen something similar to this slide before. This is the entire platform. So I've heard that you all are very familiar with Power BI, maybe not so much with the rest of the platform, which is what was today, today's session. So we've got Power Apps, so you can build apps. We've got Power Automate, you can do automation. Power Virtual Agents, which I don't think we got to today, which are like chatbots. And then Power Pages, which is kind of like an externally facing website or an externally facing like Power App. Because Power Apps, you might have learned before that they're kind of internal to your organization. So you'll see today that we're going to be uploading some information into a Power App, but using externally Microsoft Forms. And so we power everything by using data connectors. We can use AI Builder and Dataverse, in addition to other data sources, right? So you have, maybe a SQL database, maybe you're using SharePoint on your end. All of these things can go into the platform as well. So we are going to go into a little bit about Power Automate. I know Rachel told you about stuff. We can do a ton of stuff with Automate. We can get notifications. We can get, Teams notifications. We can post on social media. We can send emails. We can send adaptive cards. We can send virtually any notification that you want to yourself, a customer, right? This could be something to send for yourself for productivity. If a line in your SQL database changes or a certain column, maybe you want to know about it. Maybe you want to know on social media when, somebody posts about your company. Different things surrounding that. Want to be able to collect data. So you do it in Power BI, but maybe we need to like move it around. Maybe we want to take something that's new in an Excel spreadsheet and add it to another data source. Maybe we want to gather some information from another department, right? So we can kind of move things around as needed. We can synchronize files, we can create files, we can create Word documents, PowerPoint templates, PDFs, whatever you need from this. So instead of having to manually create documents yourself, if you were using the same kind of things over and over and over, you can even add some customization to it. And then approvals. So most likely you've got some approval scenario going on. It might be a budget. It might be some sort of work expense. It could be, like content for a document. So we can do, this is just, a small view of a ton of things that we can do with Power Automate. It's my first love. And just think of Automate as the behind the scenes work engine behind, like Power Apps or Power Pages, and also could be for Power BI too. Okay, so we're going to get out of the slideshow for a bit. We'll come back to resources. I will email you guys these as well. We're going to do a demo now that is going to be using Power Automate. If you open up I will also drop this link in the chat for you to this, so you can scan the code, or we can also, let's see. Let's collect some responses. So our form, I'm going to drop this in the chat. Let me know if you cannot get it. So this is the form that we're going to use. So what we're going to do is a bit of a scenario where we are going to take information from forms. We're going to dump it into a data source, and then we are going to show you how we can display this in an app. So we're going to tie parts of the platform together. Since Canvas apps are internal to an organization, Power Pages are external facing, we can't get you direct access to the app. It would take a little bit of time to add everybody to my tenant. So we're going to kind of fake this and have people submit their information via forms. We are going to take a look at a flow that is going to move this information from forms to SharePoint, and then also post on Twitter. I think, Rachel, you did a demo with forms as well. So this is like a really easy way for people to move information around. And so while I don't have the entire app built out for this use case specifically, I'm going to show you also one that's completely finished and show you what that can do. So the form is very short, give you, 2 minutes or so to fill it out. Just your name, what's your email address? Do you use Twitter? Just because I want to follow you if you're putting out content out there at some point. And then it'll just ask you yes or no, whether you select yes or no. It'll drop down the rest of the questions, and just as a fun thing, we said pick a celebrity. So I can start looking to see responses coming in. All right, is anybody, I don't see any. Awesome, there we go. New stuff is coming in, great job. All right, so you're familiar with this. Forms is a very like instantaneous, like being able to get responses from folks. We know that we can see this data, in Excel. What on the back end, what we want to do is we want to then push this information into a SharePoint list. So what I've done is I've set up a data source in SharePoint, right? So I just called it Bootcamp Attendees. And if we refresh this, we should start to see a bunch of information come in. How did we get this here? We did this by powering it with Power Automate. So we'll come over here and I'll show you this is what the flow looks like. Don't get too hung up on all the steps that are here, but just know what we've said to a flow is when we have a new form response, and we can pick the form response that we want, we're going to get the response details. We have to manipulate some data, so we've set some variables. I had to set a condition. Oh boy, I did not turn this on. Okay, so some tweets we'll have some tweets that are coming in, but the original ones for people that just submitted stuff. Did not quite come through yet. So we said, if somebody has a Twitter handle, what we want to do is post a tweet and post their name and anything, information that they put in the form. So this was just kind of fun. Then we said, let's create an item in SharePoint for this. So let's create an item in our data source for this. And then let's send you an email, regardless of if you have Twitter or not, to say, here's all the information you submitted, right? Very quick kind of flow that we can, go through. So we are able to pick exactly what data source that we want for this. So for the form, we picked the form that we want. We're able to say, if somebody has a Twitter account, let's post a tweet. If not, we need to do a few things. We want to be able to set some variables that says, if somebody doesn't use Twitter, we want to set a variable that says no. So when we write to our data source, it says no. And then we also want to say, like, we want to write that their Twitter handle is none, right? Or else it would be blank in the data source. So we can kind of manipulate things as we would like, and then set them in the SharePoint list later on, right? So Rachel showed you probably that you can use dynamic content. So we can pull information from our previous steps that's available to use in this flow. And we don't have to add everything. That's the beauty of Automate, is that you choose what information you would like. So we could have easily said, so this field is actually, it's called name, but when you put in steps, it'll stay as title in this action, but in the data source, we can rename what it is. We could put this as anything we would want. It can be a choice column. It can be free text. It can be a number. It's whatever we need it to be. Okay. So we matched up here, to the step here in SharePoint. We said, here's our site address, our SharePoint site. Here's the list that we want to write to. And then here's the information. So the dynamic content for the form, we've matched it with a field in our data source. So here, this is name in the data source. We can see that there is a question about names. So we said, what is your first name? We're going to put that here. What is your email address is another question. So we're going to put that in the email field. Do they use Twitter? This is this variable that we set that says, if they use Twitter, we want it to say yes or no. What's your Twitter handle, on and on and on, right? And so we can be very selective about what information we want to use. If we didn't want to gather email addresses, but it's in the form, you could take it out of the form, or we could just not populate the item in the data source, right? It kind of depends on how you're gathering data, who your audience needs to be, right? Because maybe a couple of groups are using the same data from the forms, but you don't have to take all the data that comes out of that. You can choose what you want to do. And then here we're just using a very common, connector for Outlook just to send an email. And hopefully, has anybody received an email yet? If you want to give me like a reaction for a thumbs up or a heart or something, but you should have received an email of some source to say, awesome, Francis, I see you got one. Great, that we can then send automated emails, and it was personalized. It probably had your name in it, right? Because we said hi title, so that should have been hi so-and-so's name, and then all the information that we put into that form. And again, we could select what we want to put in there. Requester email was probably a little bit redundant. We already had, your email address, and like you already put it in, so you probably don't need to be emailed your own email address, but just for the sake of, getting to see how this works, we put it in there too. Cool. Awesome, Rachel. Glad to see. So we did one thing. We submitted a form and it did a bunch of stuff for us, right? And this is the beauty of automation, is I could have manually sent you an email like when I received the form, right? Because we've got 12 responses. I could have sent 12 emails out manually to each person, right? But sometimes you don't have the time for that. Why would you want to do that individually? But we can personalize it with a name, with some information, which is a really, really cool part about Power Platform. And then also what should have happened is we should have had some tweets that posted, right? So let's see on my account. Oh, so tweets didn't come in. Okay, so this is a trial and error thing, right? Sometimes flows for live demos don't work, and that's fine. I think that was in part by me for turning off. There's a setting in here. Actually, show a little secret that if you need to test out a flow but don't want to send out a big notification or something, you can actually turn it off temporarily. So what I had on was something called static result, which meant if this was enabled, then no tweets would be sent even though the flow is running in the background. And we can actually we'll take a look at the run history to see if the tweet actually ran. And if not, I'll just rerun something else. So maybe Francis, you'll get, or maybe I'll just rerun like the last one that came through, and then we should see a tweet come through. All right. Okay. Awesome. So we've had people submit stuff. We've got some flow runs here in our history. So let's take a look at the last one that came in. And as you can see, this stuff happened incredibly quickly, right? So all in all, this flow took about 1 second to run, which is really, really quick. So much faster than you could have done this by hand yourself with each response, right? So when the response is submitted, we get some details from this. So we get the form ID. This isn't very useful to us right now. So we had to say, okay, when the new response is submitted, we want to get these response details. Cool. Got the response details. And here we go. If you can see this, I'll, put my screen up a little bit more, but we've got all the information. This is all the dynamic content that came from that one form response. So Cyprian, awesome, great. You have submitted a flow successfully. And remember, like you necessarily didn't know that all of this was going on in the background, right? So people might benefit from automation and have no idea. So we've got Twitter handles, we've got, an output response and a body. So we see like these nonsensical IDs. These are cloud IDs that are, we'll find in flows. And as you get a little bit more advanced, you'll be like, okay, sometimes these are relational IDs that you'll need to use in different steps. We initialize some variables, right? So we said we're always going to pick whatever the Twitter handle is, unless somebody doesn't have a Twitter handle, right? And then we would say, if they don't have one, then we want to change that response to none. So we just set it as a default to say, pull somebody's Twitter handle. But if it's none, then we'll set it later. And then, of course, that static result that I had, I turned it off for the tweet, so it didn't actually post the tweet. So what we're going to do is we're just going to resubmit this to show you what it would look like, right, if it had been working properly. So to turn that off. But it did create the item and it did send the email, right? So we created the item in our data source with exactly what we had with the form. There were a few columns on here that you couldn't see in the form, but that I set in the data source. So we can add information, like not display information that we want, right? So it just depends on what you need. And then we sent an email, which should have been a bit personalized. Sorry, this stuff was a little big. To send an email, right? So we've got hi so-and-so, it's their actual name. Gives us all the details of what they did. There's some formatting here. The emails are formatted in HTML. So you can add different fonts, you can add images, you can do italics, bold, whatever you need to do. It's a very flexible platform. Okay, so that's what we did. Let's see if anybody submitted something a little bit sooner than maybe I think Cyprian, yours was the last one that came in. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to resubmit a few of these just so we can get the tweet aspect of it. Okay. So let's resubmit. And you're going to receive another email. What I could have done and what I will do for the next one is I'm going to turn off this send an email action. So we're just going to get the tweet. I could also turn off the creating a new item portion just to test this too, so we don't add another line item to our data source. So let's do that. I'm going to go into the flow. And I use this for testing a lot because sometimes you don't need extra entries in your SharePoint list. Sometimes you just create a little too many extra things that you don't want. So we just want to test part of it. Okay. Ooh, okay, that's fine. Live troubleshooting. It looks like I updated I updated part of this and the flow hadn't updated too. So we're just going to delete these and we're going to save. And then we'll test. Okay, so we know this one, Cyprian, that would have been yours. So let's do this one, whatever this one is. And we should get a tweet. I don't know whose submission it was, but we can take a look. Oh, nope, Cyprian, it was yours again. So we should get a tweet this time. Let's pick another random one to see. We'll resubmit that one as well. Okay, cool. So this should have been for Francis. That's for you. All right, so if we come over to here and we've refreshed the page for Twitter, we should have a tweet that says, it's not doing it. That's interesting. So sometimes live demos do not work. It was working just before we did this. So let me check the run history one more time to make sure we turned off the static result, and it looks like it did not turn off. Okay, we'll try that one more time. Sometimes it can be a little finicky. All right, send out these last two again. Actually, let's try it. There's a new-ish feature where we can select to run several runs at the same time. So we're just gonna see what happens with this. Let's resubmit all of these. Might get some duplicates, but that's okay. Okay, and two fail, totally fine. All right, so let's go here and try again. There we go. Okay, we've got a few. It worked. There, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So it worked. We can't. There's a policy in place that Microsoft has with Twitter to not spam. On Twitter. So we can't actually tag the people per se, even though we had the app mention there. But you get the idea of with the click of a button when it worked, right? When I reset that one step, we now have information from here. So we didn't have to post everything again. Like we chose what we wanted to, right? So we didn't put out your email address on the internet. Don't want to do that. But we decided to just take, if you had a Twitter handle, what your handle was. So Gideon KN Katish, sorry if I pronounced that wrong. What you like about the bootcamp says, I've learned a lot in this bootcamp and I've expanded my knowledge on Power Apps. Awesome. That's great. We have one from France that says he also likes Power Apps. That's great. Power Apps are great, right? Sorry, did somebody come off mute for a question? But we can do, this is a very simple example of what we could do with automation. Now, let's see how this information appears in an app, right? So we've done that, you've seen, okay, automation, we can move things from one place to another. This data source that you have that you're populating to could be Excel, SQL, right? It could be Dataverse, it could be whatever we want, right? And that's just one aspect to it. What we next wanted to do was see, well, pretend, we're going to show you like in an app, in a Canvas app, that we could really submit the same form. Really, this was like mimicking what would have been if we were able to access the app from an internal organization. All right, so done our form, we ended up getting 14 total responses, right? We moved that information and in SharePoint, right, we saw that that flow ran in 1 second. So we've gotten all of these responses in a matter of like 1 second each time that flow runs. You can see how fast this is. I set a couple of extra fields in this data source because I'll show you in the app, right, what this looks like, but you didn't need to see them at all. Think about automation like running on the back end that maybe you don't need to touch physically your data source every time. Maybe you don't want users that are submitting requests to touch it either. It also could be that you want to use automation or apps in order to be very selective about what you want people to access, whether that's actually touching it, seeing it, et cetera, et cetera. So in this case, if this was like you guys wouldn't see, this database, you would just know that, okay, I'm going to get an email after I do all of this. Okay, so I want to show you an app, right, that was built using this data source. I'm going to save and refresh just to make sure that everything went through. And part of this is unedited because I'm going to show you what a fully like a workable version of this app would be in like a more of a business scenario. But for funsies, I call this is the very awesome celebrity requester portal, right? And so if we play this with apps, right, we were able to do a few things. We were able to customize the screen, right? Any color palette that you want, you can design it that way. We customized it by, adding, it says my name right now, but if you were logged into the app, it would display your name because it's now integrated with Office 365 users. It's a connector in Power Automate. It's also in Power Apps, right? Because we're using the same set of Microsoft tools. We have the ability to integrate a lot of things together. So if it was somebody else in my organization, it would display their name. Adds like a little bit of customization to this. I have a button here that, say somebody has an issue with the app, if they were to click on it, it would open up an email. I'm not sure if it's going to work because I don't have Outlook necessarily. It does. It's with mail. It doesn't work with my Outlook account, but here's what I'll show you. What it would semi look like is, if it were with Outlook, it would just open up a new email, and it would already have who it needs to go to, and you just type your message, right? So you can do things like that. Just click of a button, opens up Outlook for them. You can already have it addressed to the two fields. So if you are working, with a group, somebody's having a question, they can just email you directly. They don't even have to like go to their Outlook and open it up, right? Some customization. If we do submit or view a request, it'll take us to the requests that are available. And again, for some reason, we're having issues with this. It only has the one request that I've had. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh this again and see if that works. Let's see. And if not, I've got a fully built app anyway that we will show. Okay. There we go. It shows a few. That's not even the right one. Don't know why it's doing this, but the premise of this is that we would be able to see the requests that are coming in, and it would have all of your information. Oh, you know what it was? I know exactly what this is. I don't think I actually published the app. Give me 1 second. It's saved and published, and it's pulling from the wrong data source. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pivot to one that actually has some things in it. Well, the idea was that you would be able to see all the requests coming in. Okay, now it's working. There we go. Just took a little bit of time. So we have requests, right? The request number is, if we're looking at our data source, our request number is the number of the ID that came in. So if we were to add a column here, where's our ID column? If we were to show our ID column, let's drag it over here. Our ID column is numbered for what's coming in. And in the app, we can see that too. I started on request number 8 because I had some stuff and I deleted there. The requester, it's pulling the name from the fields that we did, right? So Power Apps, just like Power BI, you hook up to a data source and you pull the data. We've done the exact same thing. This Power App is connected to our data source and it's just pulling things in. And we've decided to pull what information is applicable to us, right? We have the ability to delete requests, which would then delete from our data source as well. We can see the priority, like low, medium, high. Like I had a couple of fields that I selected as low, medium, high. The request status, we could filter. So if one of these we changed to in progress or complete, we could then filter by whatever the request status is here too, which I think is pretty cool. So you can vary things. If we want to add a new form, so if we right? So this was kind of the basics of what we did for our Microsoft form. This could be a very basic way to pull this into an app. So we could do the same exact thing as we did with the form. We had a couple of fields. Do you use Twitter? Yes or no? We have the ability to do the collapsible fields. And the same information would go to SharePoint and display exactly like we have before. So instead of using forms, you could use a pretty Power App to do it, right? I'll show you an example of what it could, like a built out app would look like with request. My idea was to have some flows powered behind this to make, like celebrity posters, and didn't quite get that far. But a real life business scenario that I've had is when I was working in pharma. I worked with something called the regulatory group. So this regulatory group, right, there's regulations for the medications that were being made, and people would have to submit paperwork to be approved. We could have done this approval via email. We could have done it, in an app. Power Platform gives us the flexibility to do things in a couple ways. The reason we wanted to do the approvals in the app was because we could also create like a gallery for people to view their own requests. So instead of just getting an email update, they could go check the app as well if they wanted to, because sometimes things get lost in email. It just gave a little bit of a variety. So in what we did for this one was, viewer submit a request, so just like the other one. And we had the gallery requests. So I've done two things. I have admin mode, and I also have a regular person mode. This was just for simplicity. So if you are an employee and you're submitting a new form, right, we had a few things that we needed to fill in. So instead of using Microsoft Forms for this, we started using, an app. Previously, this whole entire process of submitting the paperwork was simply just over email. And it got really messy because the woman who was reviewing the paperwork couldn't tell what was a priority, right? She would have to write things down on sticky notes or keep track of her own things in Excel. It just added a bunch of more steps. So we would have people submit this paperwork to the regulatory specialist through the app. She would have the gallery in order to keep track of all the requests. And then we would have the app send out emails as people's requests were being addressed. So when when it was new, they got an email that says, hey, you've been submitted, just like you all got when we did the Microsoft form. When it was in progress, they would get an email that says, hey, your request is in progress. And when it was complete, it was complete. And it also sent them the paperwork. Our regulatory specialist had to then fill out a form that was also generated by Power Automate that she had to fill out to say, okay, this drug is safe to use, maybe it's not safe to use, maybe you have to do an additional investigation. Whatever needed to happen, we would have Power Automate create that template, and all she had to do was click on a link and fill it in. And when she would hit save and email, it would then email that form to the person so they had that feedback that they needed. So all we did was we took from our data source, right? Back end is SharePoint for this. Nobody needs to know the data source, but this is what people would see when they're submitting a form. They would put in a deviation number. So if we had a deviation from our process, had a number, what the product was, so what the drug was, what the due date was for this team, the separate team to submit, and then like an assessment priority. And what we did was if the deviation due date was far away, right, we could say that the response priority was low, and it would give us a date. It would calculate, we'd had Power Apps calculate a date for us so that everybody wasn't submitting, them for rushed requests, right? If it's low, we were able to create this combo box to say, calculate this date for 5 days. If it's a medium response, we'll do it in 3 days, but now you have to give a justification. And so, we have this pop-up box that is now dependent on what this response date is, and the same thing for high. You'd also need justification. Then for us, the document, what we would do is we would just, instead of having them upload a document, which you could to a Power App if you wanted to, a hard copy, we said, why don't you give us the Office 365 link? So either from SharePoint or OneDrive, and then people would submit. So that's the front end for the user. The user would also see the gallery, right? So they could then they could see their request in this gallery. And if it's a new request, we made it so that maybe they submitted it by mistake, that we could then delete our own request, right? And it would delete that entry from SharePoint too. The person who is looking at the request doesn't have to worry about seeing this either. And so here would be, this was a custom page that was made to view the request. So this is where somebody could come to say, okay, here are all the details from my request. We did this in an email, right? This is the beauty of Power Platform. You can put it anywhere. And we made it look kind of pretty too. And when somebody submits their document, I don't know if this is actually going to open because I might have deleted it in the data source, but what it would do is it's going to open an Office 365 link to the document that they submitted. Okay, so in this case, I had uploaded a PDF and just gave the link to the PDF. All of this was stored in SharePoint, right? Your users have only had to fill out a few fields in a Power App, and automation has done the rest. It's gotten the link, it's taken all the data, it's put it in the back end, and then we can do some additional manipulation with it. So this is what it would look like to a person that has submitted something. If we were to go to the admin mode, so say this is a person addressing requests on the other side, they have the ability, we have hidden some things from just users to use, but we've also given the ability to the admin to be able to delete some requests. So maybe it was a duplicate request. She could do it at any point, right? Doesn't matter if it's new, if it's feedback is required. The reason why we have, users can't delete requests at any time is, what if the reviewer is in the middle of the review and somebody just suddenly deletes a request, right? And it takes that out of SharePoint and then they can't see it anymore. So to, cut down on some confusion, we made it so that only the admins have the ability to delete a request if the status is not new. So here, if we go to a new request and we turn on the admin mode here, right, because this is a form that we have on the back end, this then gives me a ton more options to manipulate this data. So this is just for simplicity, like nobody is going to have the admin mode as a toggle. But now the admin who is addressing the request has the ability to do whatever is needed, right? So all of the information at the top stays static because that's what came into the request. But now in the bottom, we have the ability to add additional things on the approver side that we also will write back to our data source. So we should be able to search for somebody's name. I think I have like Beyonce in here, maybe. There we go. Beyonce's in here to make it really easy to be able to assign somebody to this request, right? So this might be Beyonce, it might be me. We then, if we wanted to say, okay, we have taken a look at this document and it looks totally fine, we then change the status, right? It could be that the approver has time right away to look at it, so they may not even need to use in progress. They're looking at it right away, and they can go to complete if it looks good. If it looks like it needs some additional information, right, we can say that employee feedback is required. And once we were to hit save an email, right, if we didn't have any additional notes, it would then send an email to the person saying, hey, by the way, your document actually needs some extra attention. Can you let me know this amount of information? We don't even have to go to Outlook to send that email. The app does it for us because these buttons are powered by flows on the back end, right? So we're now cutting down on having to go to external applications at this point because we can do it from here. So we could set the regulatory lead, we could set the status for the request, we could type notes to the request owner, and we can save and email those if we wanted to. We could also just save this. Maybe, it's we need to come back later to it. Maybe it's we're going to lunch, and we don't really need to do an email. We just kind of need to save our progress. And then there's some internal notes, right? This box, we made it for people to be able to just write their own notes just for the internal person, right? So you've got a lot of flexibility with Power Apps and Power Automate, where we've moved the data, right, from a data source into something. We could then say we wanted to create files, which is what I've done. This regulatory impact assessment request, or this report, is a Word template that has been copied and the information has been filled in from the request from SharePoint so that when the approver sends the paperwork back, right, it has details on it. It's got like a request ID, it's got the original requester's name, it's just got stuff for, a document repository. I don't think if I click on this that anything is actually going to pop up. I might have deleted it again. Yeah, so it's just a blank document for now. But In this case, this could have been a whole entire Word template that's already been filled out, and all the requester needs to go and do is fill in their notes that is pertinent to this case, if that makes sense. I think that's it. I've got 4 minutes left. I know that was a lot. Did this make sense to folks to see some possibilities on how to integrate multiple bits of the platform? Or was this a little confusing?
Very informative, huh? Very informative. For me, maybe others can speak. But it's really good.
Awesome. Yeah, what I will do is confusing on your okay, we'll walk through this real quick, Elvis. So the intention was we've had Power Automate do a few things. We filled out a Microsoft form because the form faces external. An internal organization, I would have been able to give you guys access to this app. You would have been able to go into here to submit a request yourself, right? This would have had the information from the form. We didn't have the ability to do that because the app is in my tenant, so we decided to do a form. With Power Automate, what we did was we took all the responses here from the form and we moved them into SharePoint. Okay. And then what we did with that is we sent you an email that says, thanks for your submission. And we also were able to post a tweet about it, right? Had things like worked, as intended, we got a few tweets out of this. Then what we would have had is the external information we can display in this app, right? Had some kinks with the app. But the idea is that we would have been able to see the data that was submitted from Power Automate, right, from here into the app. This information got into the app because we moved the data from forms to SharePoint, and SharePoint's on this back end. Then what we'd be able to do is things like deleting a request, that's powered by automation, right? If we were to go to a request, so for the fully built out app, that was, for the business use case that I showed you. Where did it go? Right? For this one, when we submit a form, so pretend this is this is an internal Microsoft form, right? This information goes to SharePoint by automation, right? We then could take a look at the requests here, right, that are coming in. We can delete, that's powered by automation. Us being able to write to these fields is automation. We could then take automation to do additional things just from the app. We can send emails, we can create files, we can create new rows in a SQL table, we can post to social media, we can do whatever it is. So in this way, we're tying two things together, because if we were just using the app itself alone isn't powerful enough. We actually need Power Automate in the background to be able to add additional features that we would want, maybe things that you do by hand. Maybe it's when a new request is submitted, you send a Teams message to somebody. Maybe it's you need to create a meeting invite, right? Maybe it's you need to create a new Excel workbook, a new OneNote notebook. Maybe it's you need to refresh a Power BI data set, right? You wouldn't be able to do that with just the app alone, but we can create things in the app that would allow us to do the rest of it. Does that make sense? Elvis,
Elvis.
think does that make a little bit more sense? Oh, I think oh, there he is.
Yes,
Oh,
it
yeah,
does,
yes.
Azure.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so sorry. What I will do is I will put together like a more comprehensive video so that you can see it all in action, right? I'll toggle through screens. Just think that like software development and software engineering can get a little complicated, right? We used so many different things with automation that normally we'd have to do by hand, right? If somebody, submits a request, we'd have to do a tweet by hand. We'd have to send an email by hand. And now okay, great, Elvis, good to hear. Now we have the option of doing a lot more. Maybe you're constantly creating PowerPoint presentations for templates for a meeting. you could have automation fill in some things. Maybe you're using SharePoint as your data source, or SQL or whatever, and you just need to create some, an outline of a PowerPoint presentation. You could do that with automation. One of the use cases that I had using a Power App was the Power App is the user interface, right? It's the part where you put information in. Automation can do things on the back, and then we could even display this information in a Power BI dashboard. And I have use cases like that at other businesses where people would submit, a safety event. Maybe somebody had a slip, trip, or a fall, an electrical hazard or something at work. They would use a Power App to submit, hey, there's been an emergency incident, right? Power Automate would then go on the back end and say, okay, well, who did the incident affect? Who's their manager? We need to send them paperwork to fill out so we get all the details on this before our team can start an investigation. Normally, this would be a manual process. You'd email the person and their manager, copy, a template of some sort from SharePoint. If it's a, Word document with information, you'd rename it, you drop it in a SharePoint or into Teams or email it to a person. And then you got to wait for them to respond to it and let them know that it's, let you know that it's done. And then blah, 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 blah. In this case, we automated the whole process. So when somebody submitted an incident through the app, Power Automate went in, said, okay, well, we were gathering all the information. We're going to send a confirmation email to the people to say, hey, we got your thing. We then went and made copied templates of the paperwork that was needed, renamed them to the specific incident, dropped them in a folder in SharePoint, and then sent that link out with all the details to the affected person and their manager in an adaptive card in an email. And then they were able to press buttons to say when they were done with it. If they didn't do it within 24 hours, automation had this whole thing on a loop. So it would then send the person an email saying, hey, reminder, your preliminary forms haven't been filled out. And so the safety team can't begin their investigation. And so that would just keep going. The safety team didn't have to reach out to anybody anymore at this point prior to that paperwork being filled out, right? They didn't have to remember to do reminders anymore, because automation was doing it for them. They didn't have to create paperwork anymore. They didn't have to reach out to people anymore. When the person was done with their paperwork, they pressed a button in an email that then sent a message to the safety team that said, hey, so-and-so's completed their paperwork, right? And they had a status list that they could monitor just in SharePoint because that was our data source. So they could see if somebody hadn't, filled out their paperwork yet, if it was over, we had on the loop, if it was greater than 7 days and the person hadn't filled out their paperwork, it then went overdue. And then the safety team got another message that says, okay, now you may have to do some manual follow-up. It could be like the person went on vacation or something. So there's so many different scenarios that you could use with automation. I say to start small. Think of very routine processes that you do on an everyday basis. It could be for you. It could be for your department. If it's you need to go check a table somewhere for changes every day, maybe you just write a workflow to email you what's changed in it or to send you an alert when something's changed. Perhaps I had a reminder every Friday to remind me to submit my timesheets. Trying to think what else we had. We had if we needed to get a copy of a file that was edited every week, and we only need to know that it was edited and ready, we would just copy whatever file was in SharePoint and stick it in somewhere else so we could display it. So it kind of cut down on a lot of manual work. But if you need to gather information first, right, maybe this Power App is the way to go, if that makes sense. I know we're a little bit over time. Does anybody have any questions for me? Okay. What I'm going to do is because I have a few of your emails, I am going to, instead of going through the resource and everything, I'm going to send you an email using Flow with a list of resources for you to get started on your journey with Power Apps, Power Automate. I'm sure you've already received some before. And I know we all have kind of our personal, people that we like to follow online when we're developing. So I'll also send some of my personal recommendations for what I think is helpful for learning Power Apps and Power Automate and my contact information. So if you have questions, if you get started and you get stuck, you can reach out to me and I'm totally willing to help.
Yes, Aja, thank you very much for your presentation at past midnight. Is it 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. as
It's
at
5
this
a.m.
time?
now here for me.
Oh my. We are almost taking supper. Oh, no, lunch, not supper, here in Kenya. And it was really action-packed, and we really appreciate. Please share the links to your social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, so that we can be able to share or have access to you. She's so much available and willing to help, and I really appreciate that. So if you send her a chat when she can, she will always message you back with your questions. So don't worry about that. So for Rachel, the presentation that she was to do at the end, she'll send a video because her desktop has not been able to open. And maybe before we wind up, maybe Ajay, you could tell us what advice do you have for a beginner, total beginner, on the Power Platform? What approach should they take? Because
Mhm.
at times you find the resources are so many online
Yes.
and it's hard to know which to follow. And if you
Yeah.
start on Microsoft Learn, they give you just a bunch of so many pages. I can visualize close to 1,000 pages, and you're like, oh, where should I start? So maybe
Your
you
eyes
can
start to
just
glaze
give us
over.
that. Yeah.
Sure. So I think with Power Automate, personally, I think Power Automate is the hardest to learn of all of the platform. Power Automate and Power Virtual Agents go together. And I say that because there are so many different use cases. When you learn how to build an app, you learn how to put a screen in and build some controls in, right? You build an app, you build a screen, you have a drop down menu that you can add. You can add a choice column, you can add a single line of text column, right? Very basic. But there are so many different use cases for Power Automate, it's hard to know where to start. I like to start in templates. I'm also going to link to you guys like an intro session that I've done. I know Rachel's, going to have one too. More information, the merrier, right? Learning from two different sources. But I like to look at here, I can show you here that if you go to the Power Automate homepage, it's got a bunch of examples for you to be able to learn. So there's the Microsoft Learn information here, but there's also templates that are already built for you to play around with. There's a few here, but if you go to this side on the left-hand side, you can search in the templates for a keyword for something you were trying to do. So if you're working with something with SQL, somebody might have already built exactly what you're looking for. It shows you the different types of flow. So you can do scheduled. So it can do, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 2 p.m. You have automated that when something happens, right? You receive an email, you can save the attachments. There's also, you push a button and, something will happen. I like templates because they're built for you. And then you can modify them. So let's see, for example, let's just click on this one for fun. I don't really use, yeah, actually that's not going to work because I don't use Yammer on this account. So okay, let's do forms. That's going to make me set up a notification. Sometimes, let's see, forms. Okay, let's do an email for forms, right? We actually did this already. When somebody submits a form, we said send an email. We built that from scratch because as you get better at it, you will start building it from scratch. But here, this is already built out. You can delete things, you can add things to them. So I say take a look at the templates to see if there's something already created for you that you may not have like the skill set yet to use. Use the Microsoft Learn resources. If you have questions, the Power Users forms, just Google what you're looking for. There's guaranteed to come up an answer. Just put in a couple keywords and Power Automate. A couple of keywords, if you're using like, how do I do X, Y, and Z in SQL? The Power Users forums, I'll include that as a resource. They're like chat rooms, very helpful. If you get stuck, come to Twitter. If you have a Twitter account, put your question out on Twitter and use the hashtag Power Automate or Power Platform. There are a bunch of us that spend way too much time on there and will answer your question too. And then also YouTube is a really valuable resource. So if you're looking for how to do something with a certain application, type that into YouTube. So SharePoint, create item, Power Automate, and you're going to find a ton of resources there too. So when you're starting to build your flows, I say, like I said, start small. Don't think of an entire business process. Sometimes it's what is one thing that you can do in that process right now that's manual that you can automate. Maybe it's you are taking attachments from an email and saving them if they're from a certain person. Automate that. If it's another bigger business process, just find one chunk of that to start, because if you try to do the whole entire thing at one time, you're going to get stuck and maybe a little frustrated too. I think those are kind of my my tips. So templates, Microsoft Learn material is very good. YouTube, if you get stuck, and Googling. Googling is, Rachel will tell you too, Googling is a huge thing, and Twitter, we're always asking for help on Twitter too. So I would say those are my methods to help people.
Okay, yeah. That's very, very much informative, and we appreciate. Yeah. So before we allow you to go back to sleep, I think members, thank you for joining this meetup, and the speakers have been great. We attest to that, even though we have given them very few minutes, 45 minutes, in the interest of time. But they have done an incredible job, from Ritika to Chesko to Rachel and to Azure. And we welcome you all to Kenya, because yes, we have met virtually, but please come. This is a good place. We are on the equator. The sun is always here. We don't have fluctuations. So yeah,
That sounds great to
welcome.
me because it's cold. It's like 0 C here.
Yeah. And it's not that cold.